All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a massive, real-world corporate cover-up that was incredibly cleverly disguised as just a simple, everyday translation error. But as we start following the metadata, we're going to uncover something much, much darker. We're talking about a hidden consultant, a deeply manipulated system, and a manufactured narrative matrix that was used to quietly discredit employees. It's a wild ride, so let's get right into it. So think about this for a second. What actually happens when a corporate cover-up wears the mask of a routine administrative update? It's a brilliant question, honestly, because the people who erase credit or bend rules, they rarely call it erasure. They call it things like alignment or adding polish or, a fresh start. In our source material today, a quiet language shift almost worked completely. And it almost succeeded because of an artificial consensus, this so-called mood of the room that, as we later learned, was entirely manufactured by an external consultant. But thankfully, a very sharp team of employees decided to stop listening to that artificial mood and start reading the fine print. Have you ever heard something like this at work? Be careful not to turn every inconsistency into a personal war. This brilliantly illustrates how toxic office culture rarely announces itself with some loud cartoon villain speech. Instead, it sneaks in disguised as polite, gaslighting mentorship. A senior leader actually dropped this line to make the person who spotted the inconsistency feel like they were the one causing the problem. But here's the thing, this wasn't just random, off-the-cuff gaslighting. This was a highly specific tactic. It was part of a calculated narrative matrix that had been used to discredit strategy lead Maya Carter months earlier. It's intense systemic pressure just wrapped up and framed as kindness. Okay, moving into section 1, the quiet discrepancy. When efficiency hides erasure. The whole concept of corporate efficiency is so often weaponized to hide actual erasure. And the exact mechanism here is just staggering. When you compare the strict original English policy with the newly translated version, you can see the meaning drift clear as day. Right in the middle of a routine translation process, the absolutely crucial word retaliation was quietly softened into a super vague term about workplace friction. Now, let's be real, that wasn't a typo. Changing that one single word completely shifts the entire legal burden. If retaliation suddenly just becomes mere friction, protecting employees goes from being a strict, ironclad legal requirement to basically a casual HR suggestion. This was a meticulously calculated language shift, designed specifically to protect powerful people under the guise of a routine update. Which brings us to a foundational rule, perfectly captured by strategy lead Maya Carter. She pointed out that the most significant threats to integrity in any organization almost always hide in the most boring administrative objects. Maya knew exactly where to look for this stuff because, well, she had been burned by it before. She understood that a boring administrative document is the absolute perfect vehicle for a quiet policy rewrite, especially when manipulated by external forces like our hidden consultant. I mean, think about it. A translation file, it's practically invisible. Let's look at section 2, building the proof map, following the footprints. Okay, so once you spot a discrepancy like that, you have to move incredibly fast. You have to follow the footprints before corporate panic has a chance to swoop in and rewrite the narrative. And Maya's team, they locked down the evidence brilliantly using a replicable proof map. It goes like this. Step 1, you check the object, the literal file itself. Step 2, check the owner, who theoretically holds the keys to that file. Step 3, check the timestamp. You want the exact millisecond reality shifted. And finally, step 4, identify the beneficiary. Who actually wins from the specific edit? This entire map was designed specifically to combat the slippery tactics of external consultants because it relies entirely on systems rather than opinions. When you stack these data points up, fear finally gets a shape. You stop arguing about feelings and you start arguing about hard, undeniable facts. But here's the catch. You can't just rely on the final file alone. You absolutely need the background record. We're talking about that invisible trail of calendar exports, the saved drafts, the random meeting notes. Nina, the executive assistant in this case study, completely understood that invisible work sees everything. So she brought these background records forward, and guess what? Right there, buried among those early drafts, she found the very first traces of an external consultant's fingerprints on an internal policy. It proved, without a doubt, that this altered translation wasn't just some one-off formatting mistake. It was part of a much larger, undeniable pattern. Let's jump into Section 3, decoding the system sequence, making the metadata speak. So let's trace the exact timeline that IT auditor Jordan managed to build. At 9 a.m., the file is opened. At 9:15 a.m., the owner field changes. At 9:30, the timestamps shift, and by 10 a.m., the original author's name is completely erased. People lie, right? They get defensive, they try to talk about context, but metadata hesitates for no one. It logs exactly what happened in the exact sequence it happened. But then, Jordan dug even deeper into that metadata, and what she found was absolutely chilling. She realized her very own administrative account had been hijacked to upload the exact same narrative matrix used to discredit Maya months earlier. This wasn't just some messy internal cover-up anymore. This was coordinated sabotage, orchestrated by an external consultant, and the system facts absolutely proved it. Which brings us to Section 4, the corporate excuse, data versus jargon. Armed with that explosive data, it was finally time for the boardroom confrontation. Just imagine the tension in that room. This is the exact moment where hard, undeniable evidence meets highly polished corporate jargon. When confronted with the consultant's matrix, leadership immediately defaulted to buzzwords. They tried to use words like alignment and context and team outcome. But stacked right up against those excuses were the cold, hard system facts: a missing approval, a shifted timestamp, an erased name. It's amazing how every single polished buzzword becomes significantly weaker when you force it to stand side by side with a hard timestamp. And right at the peak of that tension, an analyst named Aisha shifts the entire dynamic of the room with one question. She looks right at the executives and asks, who benefits if this translation error is dismissed? And why is an external consultant dictating internal employee records? It was a total mic drop. Office lies survive when harm is kept vague, but they completely collapse when the benefit becomes specific. Faced with that question, the room suddenly had to admit that keeping this quiet actively protected a third party who was pulling the strings behind the scenes. Let's wrap up with Section 5, the workflow repair, architecture over revenge. So after all that, how do you actually go about fixing a system that compromised so many people? Well, you look at the incredible standard set by this team. Do not quietly fix what can publicly teach. Corporate leadership almost always wants a private fix, right? They want a quiet email, maybe a small closed-door apology. And in this case, leadership desperately wanted a quiet fix precisely because a public one would require them to actually acknowledge the consultant's malicious matrix, not to mention their own colossal failure to protect Maya and Sophia. But the team completely refused. Because the damage was public, they insisted the correction had to be public too. To do that, the team established a strict list of concrete workflow repair verbs. We're talking preserve, notify, correct, attach, name, audit. These aren't just empty corporate buzzwords. These verbs are the literal antivenom to the consultant's narrative matrix. If a new company culture cannot be written out as clear actions, then it is honestly just mood lighting. This committee built a literal hard-coded workflow to ensure that names cannot be quietly removed from projects ever again. And the most crucial point of all this is the final systemic rule they implemented. Translations must carry legal meaning checks. Practically, this means the automated system now tests the actual legal meaning of the translated words and flags any discrepancies before they ever even hit the company server. A consultant can't just sneak in and upload a softened policy anymore without triggering a massive system alert. This just proves that true repair isn't about getting revenge or punishing a single bad actor. It's about creating robust architecture that protects the next person. By writing the lesson directly into the workflow, they essentially firewall the entire organization against future narrative manipulation. Because at the end of the day, we always have to remember the human cost behind the data. For an operations coordinator named Sophia, getting her actual name placed publicly back on the record was the ultimate victory. But it was about way more than just getting credit. Repairing Sophia's record officially dismantled the consultant's matrix once and for all, and it completely validated Maya's earlier struggles. It brought the whole painful story full circle. A private fix does absolutely nothing to repair the person who is actually harmed. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. The next lie will be smarter. The next consultant might cover their digital tracks a whole lot better. Will your system records be stronger? A workplace only becomes truly safer when names cannot be quietly removed and records cannot be politely ignored. Think about how you can apply these forensic audit principles in your own career to protect your work and your team. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking the hard questions and I'll catch you on the next one.